The year I turned 16, I was reborn. I only did one thing. I stayed as far away from Julian as possible. In my past life, everyone saw him as a freak. He had severe autism. On our first day of high school, he was mocked for his stutter and suddenly fell to the ground, seizing. I was the one who carried him to the nurse's office. After that, I stayed by his side, constantly encouraging him. By the time he was 30, he won the Fields Medal, the highest honor in mathematics. Right after winning, he committed suicide, leaving behind only a single diary. That diary was filled with confessions to another woman, Vivian. It turned out that all those years, the one he loved wasn't me. It was Vivian. He had even left our house to her and his will. Heartbroken and devastated, I died on a freezing, snowy Christmas Eve. Now that I was reborn, I watched as Vivian actively went up to greet Julian. As for me, I quietly moved my desk to the farthest corner of the classroom, as far away from Julian as possible. Vivian became Julian's lab partner, and because of that, she was instantly ostracized by the rest of the class. The boy sitting behind her slipped a dead rat into her backpack. When she opened it, her face drained of all color and she let out a blood-curdling shriek. Nobody expected Julian to snap. He flipped the boy's desk over, slammed the rat right into his face, and tackled him to the ground. They instantly ended up in a brutal fist fight. I just watched coldly from my seat. In my past life, I was the one who had a rat thrown at me. But when I screamed in terror, Julian had only glared at me, annoyed by the noise. He hated how loud I was. Seeing his reaction, the rest of the class mocked me for simping for a freak and called me desperate for attention. After that, the bullying only got worse. Yet I was naive enough to think Julian and I were in the same boat. When he refused to clear his cluttered binders off our shared desk, would hunch my shoulders and write on a tiny corner of the wood. When he blocked the aisle and wouldn't let me out of my seat by the wall, I would hold my breath and wait. I'd have to climb over the back desks when the rowdy boys in the back weren't looking. For 3 years of high school, I barely dared to drink a sip of water, just to avoid using the bathroom. But he remained completely indifferent, treating me like air. Yet now Julian, who had always lived in his own bubble, actually cleared his things for Vivian. He even fought someone for her. How hilarious. Things I couldn't achieve in a lifetime, Vivian did in a single minute. After the teacher broke up the fight, Vivian gratefully slid a piece of fruit candy onto Julian's desk. She gently patted his head, treating him like a kicked puppy. Thanks for helping me. You are so sweet. It is their loss if they don't want to hang out with you." As she spoke, she threw a provocative glance in my direction. I frowned at the same time, though I wasn't sure if it was just my imagination. Julian's gaze drifted toward me for a split second before darting away. Cold it be, he was reborn too. By lunchtime, the temperature in the classroom rose, and a foul odor began to emanate from Julian. Vivian had already gagged twice, and quietly dragged her chair outward 3 times. By the time her chair was halfway into the hallway, Vivian forced a smile, trying her best to sound gentle. "Julian, do you want to go to the restroom and clean up a bit?" Julian had injured his leg when he first enrolled, so he walked with a heavy limp. As of this, he was always the first to arrive in the classroom, and the last to leave. He hated getting up from his seat. In my past life, to protect his fragile self-esteem, I lied to everyone and said I worked a night shift at a greasy seafood shack, claiming the fishy smell came from me. Even when the stench made me sick to my stomach, I swallowed my vomit, never made a sound. Vivian's gagging drew the attention of the entire class. She seemed oblivious to it, continuing to coax him with fake patience. She probably thought Julian liked her, so he would do whatever she said. But Julian just kept shaking his head, as if that was the only gesture he knew. Vivian got a little annoyed. "Julian, hygiene is important. I am only doing this for your own good." Julian's jaw clenched tight. That was a sign of his extreme impatience. I'd seen that expression once in my past life. That time he had sunk his teeth into my arm, leaving a bloody, mangled mess. The wound kept getting infected, and it took a whole month to barely heal. Vivian kept nagging. To my surprise, Julian didn't bite her. Instead, he pulled out a pocket knife and slashed his own arm. Dwelled up instantly. I subconsciously touched the faint scar on my own arm, so Julian could control his violent urges. He just chose not to control them for me. Ignoring the side of him bleeding, I turned around and started laughing and chatting with my new friends. This time, Julian was just a stranger. He had nothing to do with me anymore. It's during gym class, when we were pairing up for the buddy fitness run. Julian's eyes locked onto me. "Julian, do you want to partner up with Chloe?" the teacher asked. He nodded without a single second of hesitation. The buddy run meant one partner had to carry the other's heavy gear. Or even carry them physically if they couldn't keep up. Partnering with Julian meant I would have to drag him across the finish line. It had always been like this in my past life. But back then, I was the one who volunteered. This time, I hadn't said a word. My heart skipped a beat as I met his expectant, entitled gaze. He really was reborn. I spoke up immediately, Coach. I already have a partner, Ray. Julian's face froze. He hadn't expected me to reject him. He shot a hostile look at Logan, who was standing next to me. Logan just smiled back at me reassuringly. In my past life, Logan was the only person in class who had never joined in on the bullying. During my response, the coach sighed and tried to find Julian another partner. But Julian shut down completely. He stood in the middle of the field with his head bowed, refusing to move. He looked like an abandoned puppy. I used to be fooled by this exact look. Now it only annoyed me. But the coach didn't know his true nature. He forced the two of us into a group anyway. Julian climbed onto my back with practiced ease. On my shoulder, his raspy voice whispered the first words he had spoken to me since our rebirth. Why didn't you choose me? I countered. And why didn't you choose Vivian? Didn't he leave her 100 love letters and his entire estate? Why didn't he choose her now? He gripped my collar tightly. She'll hold me back. My chest tightened, a wave of bitter resentment washing over me. He really was consistent, wasn't he, Chloe? He called my name. Let's just keep things the way they were. I couldn't take it anymore. I dumped him right off my back onto the grass. Keep things the way they were. Servicing you for over 20 years. Making my entire life revolve around you. He frowned, looking genuinely confused. Is that not okay? My heart felt like it was being sliced by a dull blade over and over. Now, Julian, I said, coldness dripping from every word. In my past life, I didn't know you loved Vivian, but now I do. So stay the hell away from me. Once high school is over, I am applying to a college on the other side of the country. We will never see each other again. I choked back my tears and ran off. But the moment I stopped running at the end of the track, Julian suddenly stumbled over and threw up, all over my head and shoulders. The entire class burst into roaring laughter. Without a shred of mercy, I pushed him straight to the ground. Julian stared up at me, dazed by the fall. He looked at my covered, filthy clothes, his eyes still filled with that innocent, uncomprehending look. I thought he just didn't get it. But when Vivian rushed over to help him up, Julian pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket. With obsessive care, he wiped Vivian's hands clean. I am dirty, he mumbled. Vivian chuckled. How could you be dirty, Julian? She then turned to me, standing on her moral high ground, with an annoyed expression. He only threw up because you ran too fast and jostled him. How could you just dump him on the ground like that? Don't you know he could have been seriously hurt? Covered in vomit? I only wanted to change my clothes, but Vivian wouldn't let it go. No way. You have to apologize to Julian right now. I looked at Julian. Julian, if I apologize, will you leave me alone? He avoided my eyes, turning his head away, and practically ran off. I let out a cold laugh. See that, Vivian? He doesn't want my apology. Though I couldn't partner with Logan for the gym run, we quickly became close friends. This was the first time I had ever had a friend other than Julian. We often went to the local library to study, and on weekends, we went to amusement parks. Life was peaceful and beautiful. I thought I had finally broken free from Julian's shadow and could live my own life. Until one day, in the middle of a packed public library, Julian limped up to my table in front of everyone. He threw a damp, dirty gym bag right onto my open textbook. Inside were his soiled underwear. Wash it, he demanded. Mutterings and whispers instantly broke out around us. The stares directed at me were filled with shock and disgust. My face flushed crimson, my hands shaking with rage. I slammed the bag onto the floor and tried to focus back on my study guide, but the bag was thrown right back. This time it hit me square in the face. Extend Vivian, who had followed Julian inside, spoke in a sweet, dripping voice. I am so sorry, Chloe, Julian said. You've always done his laundry. I offered to help, but he held my hand and said, this kind of dirty work isn't for me. The whispering around us grew loud enough for me to hear every word. Oh my God. Does Chloe actually wash Julian's underwear? But isn't Vivian Julian's girlfriend? Chloe is still doing his laundry? That is so shameless. That instant, I felt like I was dragged right back into the nightmare of my past. Life, being pointed at and judged by everyone. Logan grabbed my hand. Chloe, let's go study somewhere else. Okay, I choked out. But Julian grabbed my arm from behind. He glared unhappily at our joined hands. Why won't you wash it? Is it because you're going to wash his instead? A few people in the library snickered. I couldn't stay there for another second. Logan looked at me with deep worry. I covered my face, feeling a sense of self-destructive despair. Maybe to Julian, I was never anything more than a maid. Someone destined to serve him. Even though we were reborn, he still refused to let me go. Logan comforted me. Chloe, Julian is out of his mind. Don't listen to a word he says. I forced myself to pull things together. I applied for the early decision interview for Apex University. Julian had already been admitted to B University. This time we wouldn't be at the same school. I wouldn't have to follow him around like a shadow anymore. But the moment I pushed open the door to the interview room, my heart sank. Julian was sitting right there in the student assistant's chair, staring at me blankly. And after I finished answering all the professor's questions, he offered a single evaluation. Chloe has zero talent. She is not cut out for this major. The very next day, his words spread like wildfire across our high school. People whispered, Chloe isn't made for academics, but she sure has a talent for washing a guy's underwear. Some bullies even started calling me laundry girl. Straight to my face. Julian's presence was dragging me back into my worst nightmares. Logan didn't know the full history between us, but seeing my agony, he gently asked, why don't we just study abroad? Logan's words woke me up. I immediately started preparing my transfer applications with him. We stopped going to school altogether. With me actively avoiding him, Julian didn't show up in front of me again. Finally, Logan and I boarded a plane to Europe. A month later, I had fully adjusted to my new life in Scotland. I excitedly shared some news with Logan. There is a prestigious mathematics competition group here. If I get in, the scholarship will cover my entire tuition. He encouraged me to go for it, to step out of Julian's shadow and prove my own worth. I studied day and night, barely even remembering to eat. My hard work paid off. Your student, Austin, said he would introduce me to the head of the competition group. I thought everything was finally going my way until I saw Julian again. He was the head of the competition group. Austin patted my shoulder warmly. You should have told me you knew the legendary Julian Vance. He specifically requested you to join. But hey, your test scores are actually amazing. My entire body began to shake uncontrollably. Julian's voice sounded like a demon whispering in my ear. Long time no see, Chloe. From now on, you'll be my personal assistant. With that, he dropped a heavy laundry bag right in front of me. Please wash these for me. My hands and feet went icy cold. I looked at him, practically begging, why? Why do you have to humiliate me like this? A familiar, confused look returned to his eyes. Chloe, isn't it good for us to be together like we used to be? As I spiraled into fear and anger, Vivian pushed the door open with a sweet smile. Am I late? We should start the meeting to discuss the thesis problem. Austin nudged me. Hey, snap out of it. It is meeting time. But Julian stopped me from entering the conference room. She isn't attending the meeting, Julian said flatly. She needs to stay out here and do my laundry. Vivian smiled and explained to Austin. Austin, you didn't know Chloe is Julian's exclusive assistant. Why else do you think he brought her into this elite group? Under Austin's strange, judgmental gaze, I fled the building, humiliated once again. Logan was waiting for me at the entrance, holding a bouquet of red roses. The moment he saw me, his smile faded. Hey, it is your first day with the group. I was worried you wouldn't get used to seeing my pale face. I threw myself into his arms, sobbing. His expression darkened. What happened? Who messed with you, Logan? I cried out. It is Julian. He is here. He is at this university, too. How is that possible? I didn't understand either. He was supposed to be at Beacon University in the US. I had literally moved across the ocean, choosing a completely different country, yet he was still here. Julian, who was supposed to be in the meeting, walked out of the building. Why out of the building? He stared dead at Logan and called out to me, Chloe, get over here. Logan shielded me behind his back. She is resigning from the group. She doesn't have to listen to you anymore. Chloe belongs to me, Julian said, his eyes filled with dark, obsessive possession. Logan patted my back, comforting me. She doesn't belong to you. She is my girlfriend, and I want you to stay the hell away from her. Stop harassing my girlfriend. Austin, who had followed Julian out, looked utterly shocked. Julian, are you seriously chasing after a girl who has a boyfriend and making her do your laundry? Dude, that is incredibly messed up. But Julian looked genuinely blank. Messed up? Of course it is messed up. They're dating. They're probably going to get married and spend their lives together. Stop trying to ruin their relationship. When the words get married and spend their lives together, registered in Julian's brain. His eyes suddenly turned bloodshot. He took a step forward, trying to grab my hand. Chloe is mine. She can only marry me. Julian's fingers, raw and ink-stained, stopped inches from my wrist. Logan did not simply block him. He stepped into Julian's space with a quiet, solid mass of someone who had spent his youth rowing on cold morning waters. He didn't yell. He merely caught Julian's forearm in an iron grip and twisted it downward, forcing the prodigy to stumble sideways onto the uneven flagstones of the courtyard. Don't touch her, Logan said, his voice dropping into a register that made two passing Scottish postgrads pause on the stairs. Don't look at her. Don't speak her name. If you come within 5 yards of Chloe again, I won't bother with the university dean. I will take you apart right here. Julian regained his footing with an awkward, uncoordinated jerk, his bad leg dragging behind him. He didn't look at Logan. To Julian, other human beings were either tools or background noise. They possessed no interior life, no authority. His dilated pupils remained fixed on my face, twitching with an agitation that bordered on violent mania. You're making a computational error, Chloe, Julian wheezed, his breath rattling in his throat. He smoothed the front of his rumpled, stained trench coat with frantic, clawing motions. You're my assistant. You have always been my assistant. The variable space does not work without you. I can't. The noise in the dormitory is too loud. The woman who cleans the floors uses pine oil. I cannot breathe the pine oil. You have to wash the wool blankets with unscented soda. You know this. Why are you pretending you don't know this? Behind him, Austin was staring in absolute horror. Julian, mate, what the hell are you on about? She's a first-year research fellow, not your bloody maid. Vivian had hurried out of the glass double doors, her cashmere wrap clutched daintily at her collar. Her cheeks were flushed pink from the indoor heating, her hair immaculate. But the moment she took in the scene, Julian trembling and disheveled on the pavement, Logan standing between us like a fortress wall, and Austin's disgusted expression, her eyes hardened with calculation. She glided forward, laying a manicured hand on Julian's shaking shoulder. Julian, darling, please. Everyone is looking. We have the seminar with Professor Thorne in 10 minutes. Let the girl go if she's too lazy to handle the administrative load. I can find you 3 other assistants by tomorrow. Julian jerked his shoulder away from Vivian's touch so violently that she nearly lost her footing on the slick stone. Shut up, he shrieked, the sound piercing and metallic like a brake pad grinding against a rusted rotor. He clamped his hands over his ears, his body bending double. Shut up. You wear lavender. I told you 40 times the linalool compound in your perfume stimulates the trigeminal nerve. It makes the numbers blur. Chloe never wore lavender. Chloe smelled like nothing. Chloe didn't exist when I was working. Vivian froze, her face draining of every drop of color. Several students on the library terrace turned around to gawk. Chloe didn't exist when I was working. The words hung in the biting Scottish air, crystal clear. I looked at this man, the man who in a previous lifetime had consumed 30 years of my youth, sucked out my marrow, reduced my identity to a set of calloused hands that scrubbed his vomit and prepared his unsalted broth, and for the first time since my rebirth, I felt no terror, no reflexive urge to apologize, no sinking dread, only a vast, clinical disgust. Did you hear that, Vivian? I said, stepping around Logan's shoulder just enough to meet her horrified eyes. That's what you won. That's the grand prize you schemed for. He doesn't want a lover. He wants an appliance that breathes. I turned my back on both of them. Logan, I said quietly, taking his cold fingers into mine. Let's go. We have a meeting with Dr. Sterling at 3. Chloe, stop. You cannot deviate from the baseline. Julian screamed. Behind us, the sound of his heavy, limping gait scraped against the cobblestones, followed immediately by the dull thud of a body hitting the ground. He had tried to run after me, tripped over his own twisted foot, and fallen flat into the muddy gutter. I did not turn around, not once. We moved our workspace that very afternoon from the Central Science Annex to the old Kelvin building, an imposing Victorian red brick nestled among the dripping sycamores on the western edge of campus. Dr. Sterling was an elderly numerical analyst with ink on her cuffs and an utter contempt for academic politics. She had taken Logan and me under her wing because our joint proposal on nonlinear dynamical systems didn't rely on the Brute force computational arrogance typical of the American teams. Vance is a computational freak, Dr. Sterling remarked dryly that evening, setting down a chipped mug of black tea on my desk. He possesses an idiot savant intuition for topological manifolds, but his actual methodology is a disaster of unannotated leaps and emotional eroticism. The department tolerates him because the Institute for Advanced Study wants to publish his draft on the Birch and Swinnerton-Dyer conjecture. But mark my words, genius without discipline is just an expensive explosion. Sitting beneath the warm amber lamp, with rain drumming against the leaded glass windows, I pulled open the yellowed pages of my research notebook. For weeks, a gnawing question had haunted the back of my mind. In our past life, Julian had claimed the Fields Medal at 30 for his proof resolving the Navier-Stokes existence and smoothness problem. But during the 12 years I lived with him in that suffocating suburban house outside Boston, Julian hadn't worked in isolation. He would enter manic states where he filled hundreds of loose printer sheets with frantic, illegible scrawls, then collapse into bed for 3 days with migraines. During those 3 days, who gathered the sheets from the floor? Who sorted the lemmas? Who noticed that in his third-order tensor transformations, he consistently inverted his indexing signs and spent entire nights silently rewriting the proofs line by line so that his committee wouldn't throw them into the trash? I did. In my past life, I thought I was just being a dutiful companion, tidying up his papers the way I tidied his laundry. I had possessed no confidence in my own mathematical intellect because Julian had spent 15 years telling me I was dull-witted, pedestrian, an intellectual vacuum capable only of basic arithmetic. Chloe has zero talent, he had told the admissions board. He hadn't said it because he believed it. He had said it because if the bird learned it had wings, it would never stay inside the cage to clean the floor. Chloe? Logan's voice broke my reverie. He set a warm paper bag on the corner of my desk. The smell of fresh cinnamon pastries cut through the damp scent of the old library. You've been staring at that matrix for 20 minutes without blinking. Are you okay? I looked up into Logan's eyes, clear, warm, steady, entirely free of the manic darkness that lived in Julian's gaze. Logan, I said, my voice steady. Bring me the archived preprints of Julian's work from his sophomore year at Beacon. The ones on boundary condition. Singularities. Logan tilted his head, curious, but asked no questions. He simply nodded and walked over to the terminal. 10 minutes later, the documents were spread before me. I traced the mathematical formulations with my pencil. There, on page 14, was a massive conceptual hole, a logical leap where the functional analysis completely broke down. In our previous life, that specific paper had been rejected 3 times, until Julian suddenly submitted a revised draft that won the Cole Prize. I remembered that winter. I remembered sitting by the radiator with an ice pack on my bruised jaw. He had thrown a ceramic bowl at me because his tea was lukewarm, while I worked through the boundary estimates on scratch paper, trying to find a continuity proof just to make him stop screaming at the walls. When I finally left the corrected sheets on his desk, he had snatched them up, burned them in the fireplace after copying the equations into his own notebook, and told me I was an idiot who had nearly ruined his work with my greasy fingerprints. He had built his entire career on the bones of my silent labor. Without me to fix his indexing errors, without me to reconstruct his broken logic while he slept off his tantrums, Julian Vance was nothing more than an unstable engine firing without an exhaust valve. Across the campus, the golden couple was rotting from the inside out. Because I had severed all ties, Austin and several other graduate students in the elite seminar began to witness the unvarnished reality of Julian Vance. Without my daily intervention, Julian's life deteriorated into squalor within 3 weeks. He refused to use the public laundromat because the sound of the spin cycle vibrated at the wrong frequency. He refused to eat the cafeteria food because the institutional seasoning offended his palate. Vivian, who had envisioned herself as the glamorous muse to a high-society mathematical royalty, found herself trapped in an unmitigated nightmare. I ran into Vivian outside the university apothecary near the end of November. She looked 10 years older. The tailored wool coat she wore was stained near the hem, and the dark circles under her eyes were poorly concealed beneath thick layers of foundation. When she saw me, her initial instinct was to sneer, but the sheer exhaustion in her posture betrayed her. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Vivian hissed, blocking my path on the narrow sidewalk. Her fingers were trembling around a bottle of prescription sedatives. You deliberately dumped him on me. You knew how he was. I stopped, adjusting the strap of my leather satchel. I didn't dump him on you, Vivian. You stole him. You spent our entire high school career batting your eyelashes, sending him letters, and basking in his tragic genius aura, while I cleaned his vomit. You wanted the prize. Why aren't you celebrating? He's an animal. She choked out, her voice cracking with suppressed hysteria. He doesn't sleep. He paces the flat from 2 in the morning until dawn, muttering to himself. He threw a hot frying pan at my head yesterday because I cooked eggs with butter instead of rapeseed oil. And his hygiene, my God. Chloe, he hasn't washed his hair in 20 days. He smells like a corpse. Then leave him, I said coldly. Vivian's mouth twisted into an ugly, desperate grimace. I can't. My father invested our entire trust fund into his father's research foundation back in New York. My family's social standing is tied to him being the next Fields medalist. If he fails out of the Edinburgh colloquium, we lose everything. You have to come back. Just come to the flat for 2 hours a day. Clean the kitchen. Organize his notes. I'll pay you. I'll give you £500 a week from my allowance. I looked at her. This girl who in another life had inherited my home, who had accepted the house bought with my blood and sweat while I froze to death in the snow, and I let out a low, clear laugh. £500. I stepped closer, looking down into her bloodshot eyes. Vivian, in my past life, I gave him 20 years of free labor, and he left me. Nothing but a grave in the frost. You took the spotlight. Now you choke on the smoke. I walked around her. She screamed something vile behind me, but the roar of the city traffic swallowed her words whole. Julian did not accept defeat gracefully. To a mind that viewed the universe as a deterministic system built entirely around his own cognitive primacy, my independence was not a choice. It was a syntax error in reality that had to be corrected by force. In early December, 2 weeks before the European Mathematical Colloquium, our advisor Dr. Sterling called Logan and me into her private study. Her face was set in grim, deeply etched lines. The Departmental Ethics Committee received an anonymous filing this morning, Dr. Sterling said, dropping a thick red folder onto her mahogany desk. It alleges that your submitted paper on dynamic turbulence manifolds contains plagiarized derivations from the Vance Research Group. Logan's hands clenched into fists instantly. That's absurd. Chloe and I built that model from scratch over 4 months. We have the chronological version. Histories in our local directory. I know that, Mr. Vance. Excuse me, Mr. Logan. Dr. Sterling sighed, rubbing her temples. But Julian Vance submitted a draft of his upcoming colloquium monograph yesterday afternoon. In that draft, your core lemma, the continuity condition on three-dimensional flow, appears verbatim in Section 4. Because he holds an elite fellowship funded directly by the Transatlantic Foundation, the dean is inclined to suspend your project pending an official inquiry. My heart pounded with a cold, electrifying fury. Julian had not simply stolen our lemma. He had broken into our departmental network, or Vivian had used her administrative clearance in the graduate office to copy our files from the shared server. He knew he couldn't solve the Navier-Stokes continuity constraint on his own, so he took ours, slapped his name on it, and attempted to burn our academic careers to the ground to force me back under his heel. Dr. Sterling, I said, my voice completely calm despite the blood roaring in my ears. Did Julian Vance include the supplementary proofs for that lemma in his monograph? Dr. Sterling blinked, adjusting her half-moon spectacles. He provided an outline. He claimed the full analytical expansion was trivial and would be demonstrated live during the keynote presentation at the assembly rooms next week. A sharp, dangerous smile touched the corners of my lips. He thinks it's trivial because he doesn't understand the underlying topology. I said. Logan and I deliberately left a structural trap in that lemma on the server draft. We knew someone was querying our uncompiled files. Logan looked at me, his eyes widening as the memory clicked. The negative eigenvalue on the boundary operator. You didn't correct it in the shared drive version. No, I said softly. I left the sign inverted. If you run the proof with that inversion, the continuity holds locally for 2 iterations, and then it diverges to infinity. It destroys the entire global manifold. Dr. Sterling leaned back in her high-backed chair, a slow, predatory gleam appearing in her pale Scottish eyes. So, the old professor murmured, Mr. Vance has built his flagship keynote on a foundation of dry sand. Not just dry sand, I replied. A loaded minefield. Let the ethics committee stay their hand until the keynote. Let Julian present his stolen masterpiece to every senior mathematician in Europe. The grand hall of the Edinburgh Assembly Rooms was packed to the gallery. Rafters. Crystal chandeliers cast a dazzling, unforgiving light over rows of international delegates, university chancellors, journal editors, and press photographers. Julian Vance was scheduled to deliver the closing keynote, a unified geometric resolution to the boundary singularities of Navier-Stokes. I sat in the fourth row, flanked by Logan and Dr. Sterling. When Julian walked onto the stage, a hushed murmur rippled through the auditorium. He looked like an apparition dragged from an asylum.
His suit was
hopelessly oversized, the trousers pooling around his mismatched shoes. His hair stood up in greasy tufts, and his skin had a gray, waxy pallor. Beside the podium stood Vivian, wearing a strained, frozen smile, holding his laser pointer, and a stack of printed acetates, like an anxious handler guarding an unexploded bomb. Julian began to speak. His delivery was rapid-fire, monotone, and entirely devoid of rhetorical rhythm. For the first 20 minutes, he raced through the foundational algebra, his handwriting darting across the digital projector in erratic, spidery leaps. The audience was quiet, mesmerized by the sheer computational density. Then he arrived at section 4, the global continuity lemma. My stolen lemma. The boundary behavior simplifies under the transformed Laplacian, Julian muttered, his eyes darting across the ceiling as if reading invisible script. The derivation is obvious. The negative spectral density guarantees uniform convergence across all boundary layers. He began writing the expansion on the digital tablet.
5 lines down, he paused.
The stylus hovered over the glass screen. A drop of sweat rolled from his greasy hairline, tracing a path through the grime on his cheek, and fell onto the podium with an audible tick through his lapel microphone. He wrote another equation. Stopped again. The numbers on the massive projection screen did not balance. The sign inversion I had left in the server draft had begun its work. The energy term, instead of dissipating smoothly toward zero, was compounding exponentially with every subsequent line. The manifold was tearing itself apart before the eyes of 500 mathematicians. This is an operational anomaly, Julian mumbled. He began scribbling. Faster, his strokes heavy, scratching violently against the glass. The operator must be positive. If the operator is positive, the divergence vanishes. Excuse me, Mr. Vance. A voice rang out from the second row. It was academician Laurent from the École Normale Supérieure. If you make that operator positive, you violate the conservation of momentum established in your own third theorem. You cannot simply flip the sign without invalidating the entire global existence. Proof. Julian froze. On stage, Vivian sensed the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere.
She stepped
forward, whispering urgently into his ear. Julian, skip to the conclusion.
Show
them the final theorem. Skip the derivation. Julian lost his mind. He swung his arm with psychotic force, striking Vivian across the chest with the heavy wooden tablet. Vivian shrieked, stumbling backward into the projection stand, sending the equipment crashing to the hardwood floor with a deafening screech of electronic feedback. Don't touch me, you stupid bitch. Julian roared into the live microphone, his voice echoing across the high ceilings of the hall. You distracted me. You put that perfume on the collar of my coat. You scrambled my memory vectors. Chloe. Where is Chloe? Chloe, get up here and fix the third index.
Fix the sign. You
know the sign. The auditorium exploded into pandemonium. Photographers surged into the aisles, flashes bursting in rapid succession against the dark mahogany walls.
Security.
Guards rushed the stage from both wings. Vivian was on her knees, sobbing hysterically into her hands, her designer dress torn at the shoulder, while Julian fought the guards like a rabid animal, kicking, biting, and screaming my name into the glaring lights. Chloe, you belong to me. You are my maid. You have to fix the equations. You can't leave me here. Chloe. I stood up from my seat in the fourth row. The entire hall seemed to hold its collective breath as I stepped into the center aisle. Julian saw me. He stopped thrashing in the guard's grip, his eyes lighting up with a sudden, grotesque hope. Chloe, he choked out, stretching a hand toward me. Tell them
the
lemma works. Come up here and write the third line. Let's go back to our house. I'll let you stay in the study. I won't lock the door anymore. Just fix it. I looked at him from 20 feet away. My voice, amplified by the stunned silence of the room, was perfectly steady. The lemma does not work, Julian, I said, each word ringing with finality. Because you stole an incomplete draft from my research terminal. You never understood the underlying physics, because for 15 years, you never looked at anything in this world except your own reflection. I turned toward the panel of judges seated at the front. My name is Chloe Reed, together with Logan Vance McIntyre and Dr. Eleanor Sterling. We have already published the correct, non-divergent proof in this morning's edition of the European Journal of Mathematics. Mr. Vance has no claim to this work, nor to any part of my life. Julian let out a sound that did not belong to a human throat, a hollow, ruined wail of total psychological collapse. As the security team finally pinned him to the floor and dragged him toward the backstage exit, his fingernails scraped uselessly against the polished floorboards, leaving long, faint scratches in the ancient varnish. The aftermath was swift and absolute. The academic foundation revoked Julian's fellowship within 48 hours. His father's research trust collapsed under the weight of investor fraud. Lawsuits filed by Vivian's family, who had liquidated their assets to back a prodigy who is now committed to a private psychiatric facility in the Highlands of Perthshire. Vivian returned to New York in disgrace, her family's social standing obliterated by the public scandal that had been splashed across the front pages of every major academic and cultural daily in Europe and North America. As for Logan and me, our joint paper received unanimous acclaim. The Stirling-Reed-Logan theorem became the cornerstone of modern computational fluid dynamics, earning us an extended research tenure at the Institute in Edinburgh. 3 years later, Christmas Eve in Edinburgh was cold, but it was not the freezing, desolate cold of the Boston alleyway where I had drawn my last breath in another life. The city was wrapped in a thick, silent blanket of fresh white snow. The street lamps along the Royal Mile glowed with a warm, buttery light, and the scent of roasted chestnuts, mulled wine, and pine wreaths drifted through the crisp evening air. I stood by the tall bay window of our flat in the new town, holding a mug of hot, spiced cider. Through the frosted glass, I could see the silhouette of the castle perched high on its volcanic rock, dusted with sugar-fine snow under a canopy of clear winter stars. Behind me, the front door clicked open. Logan walked in, stamping the snow from his heavy leather boots and shaking out his wool coat. He brought with him the clean, brisk scent of winter air and fresh pine. "It's coming down hard out there," he said, smiling as he set a box of warm mince pies on the wooden dining table. He walked over to where I stood, wrapping his arms gently around my waist from behind, his chin resting softly against the crown of my head. "What are you looking at, Dr. Reed?" I leaned back into his warmth, feeling the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart against my shoulder. In my past life, on this exact night, I had sat alone on the floor of an empty house, clutching a diary full of another woman's name, listening to the radiator knock until my blood turned to ice. I reached up and covered Logan's hands with my own. "Nothing," I said, watching our reflection in the dark, warm window pane. Two whole, unbroken people standing together in the light. "Just the snow. It's beautiful tonight."